Well, a number of you have answered, and I think I'm going to move on and tell you what I think is the top priority aspect of pronunciation. A lot of you who know me know this. Prosody. And prosody is the melody and rhythm of the language, and it's generally neglected in the training of teachers, and that's why I give these talks as often as I can, because it's been neglected for about 50 years. Now, some people have caught on and are doing very well, but since there's not much in the kind of journals that teachers are apt to read and not much in their training, melody and rhythm seems too much to deal with. But the reason we have to deal with it is that it controls everything, in English anyway. That includes the individual sounds. So teaching individual sounds without control of English rhythm is the hard way. That's because timing changes the sound, and you can't get a clear target language sound if you're using rhythm timing from another language. And that's true for all main types of English. And that's why I'm here as an American talking to people who are not teaching American English. It doesn't matter. It's true for all the main types, the source types, you might say, of British, American, Canadian, Australian, and whatever. The central types. There are new types of English, and then it's not true of the new types so much. So here's two main types of English. And I'd like you to write in the chat box how many syllables you hear. I'm going to make an effort to say this in a British way. Laboratory, laboratory. How many syllables? Well, there's a lot of agreement on 4, which is what I would count. If you're looking at the word because you've learned English by reading, it would look like 4, but in fact, it would look like 5. In fact, it's 4 in the spoken language. All right, here's my pronunciation. Laboratory, laboratory. How many do you hear? Now, most of you who have commented have noticed that it's the same number of syllables. And the reason is it operates under the same prosodic force of rhythm and stress, both languages, both versions, both types of English. Now there's a question in transit and transcription, but the thing is, if you're transcribing what you hear, not what you see, you should get 4 syllables for both. And that's what our students need help with, especially if they've learned English by reading. Why is prosody so important? Well, it's true that intonation is very complicated, and it can be disheartening to try to understand it all and teach it all. But what learners really need before anything else is to understand how prosody helps the listener do 2 main things. This is how the speaker helps the listener. Notice the most important words. Now, every language has to have a way to call attention to the most important words. But English, more than most languages, uses prosody to do it. And that's why prosody is crucial. Also, people need to learn to notice word grouping. Learners tend to think in terms of one word at a time, because that's the way they read. And they struggle with one word at a time. But that's missing the word grouping, and it's also missing the most important words. Now, you don't need to write this down, although usually I ask people to write on a piece of paper the sentence I'm going to dictate. If you want to do it in the chat box, fine. That gives me a clue about you. The first sentence is, John said, the boss is an idiot. John said, the boss is an idiot. Multiple attendees are typing. Some of you are using punctuation, and some of you are not. Let me give you another sentence. Try this one, and I'll say it twice. John, said the boss, is an idiot. John, said the boss, is an idiot. Okay. What's interesting to me is I've never looked at people's dictation before. So some of you have used punctuation. Some of you have not. Now the thing is, punctuation is sort of a simplified form of showing the auditory cues. I learned something. I learned something from teachers all the time. And I gave those same two sentences, they're identical words. In Seoul, which is the capital of Korea, I was told 2/3 of the audience were native speakers of English. They were all teachers, but 2/3 were native speakers. And then I went to Busan. It's a large city, but it's not the capital. And I was told 2/3 of the teachers were not native speakers of English. And what happened in Seoul was I got quite a bit of laughter, as I'm used to getting, and that made me assume everyone caught the difference between the two sentences. But when I got to Busan, there was a dead silence, with a few people laughing. And that taught me a lesson. So from that time on, I have used a slide that says visual cues. Now, all of the teachers in Busan, I'm sure, had understood the meaning of punctuation. What they didn't get was the auditory punctuation. And that meant I was trying to teach them something they had never learned themselves. So that's why I always use this slide now to show the punctuation so that people who didn't catch the auditory cues can realize it's important to teach them because they matter. These two sentences have the exact same words, but they have a different meaning. Now, this is the simplified form, the visual form I use to help people understand how prosody works together. This is language names that I use for the higher level students. The thought group. How do you spell easy? The focus word in that thought group, easy. The stress syllable in that word is ease. And the vowel sound at the center of that stressed syllable is E. Now, before I go on, you will probably notice that I'm using a more common American symbol for E. Most of the leading textbooks in U.S. pronunciation have a Y after the I letter. I use a superscript Y because I want to suggest a raising of the tongue, a raising of the pitch for this off glide. This is a something like a diphthong, and it is a separate sound. For lower level students, I would call it a word group, and the most important word and the strongest syllable, but I also say peak vowel. Now here's the problem. All the elements of the pyramid, that is, all the elements of prosody, melody and timing, are interdependent. And obviously we can't teach everything at the same time. So the solution is template sentences. Now what is a template sentence? It's a chunk of language that has within it a good deal of the aspects that you are going to want to teach separately. And the reason for teaching it together is to get it into deep memory. Here's a template sentence that I've used for years. How do you spell easy? How do you spell easy? It has to be repeated many, many, many times. And my colleague Ulla Schelin in Sweden teaches Swedish pronunciation to immigrants, and he does it many, many, many times. Now, a lot of teachers say, oh, that's old-fashioned, which it is, of course. It's been recorded for maybe 2,000 years or more of language teaching. There's a reason why it's been used a long time, and that is because if a group is speaking in chorus, how do you spell easy? How do you spell easy? How do you spell easy? In all the different ways you can say it, but at the same pace. Not slowing down, because slowing down ruins the timing aspect. So if they do that enough, they begin to gain control of it, and you can tell, because I've been in the audience when he's doing it, and I'm doing it with them, you have gaining confidence each time you do it. And of course, after a while, you'll have to come back to it to recycle it. The reason why choral repetition is good is because everybody, as in a choir, is helping each other stay in time. Whereas if you call on an individual, that person is going to be under some stress and the rhythm will disappear. It is important to have this in long-term memory. That's the purpose of the chunk. All right, what do you do with it? One element at a time. If you're teaching vowels, they are to remember in their own memory how do you spell easy. And they don't need a teacher to remind them. They don't need a recording. It's in their long-term memory, that chunk that can be used to check each element. The same with stressed syllable, focus word, and thought group. Now this is a puzzle, which I do not understand. And what's happening, it's the old tech problem. I'm not moving forward or backward.
Hi, Judy. You're moving forward for us. You've gone forward quite a lot. And we're now on Now you're going back.
I'm not, because I'm trying to find my, I don't have, I don't have the image.
It came up. The image of the butterfly.
No, you see? Ah, all right. Now I've got this, and I've got this, I've got this,
Butterfly.
and then, no. Ah, you know, that's the thing about being a teacher. The tech goes wrong. I can remember with having not having the right cable for my laptop, or the light bulb goes out on the overhead projector,
Yeah.
and nobody has the light bulb. So I do not know exactly
Where the image is gone.
for me, because I can get my outline, but
At the moment, we're seeing your slide that has the heading, the system depends on contrast, highlighting, and backgrounding. And we're seeing the images of the butterfly against the dark background and the butterfly against the light background.
good. Well, anyway, that's contrast. And what's essential, and the purpose of the prosody, is to give contrast to everything, including the individual sounds. I'll go forward if I can. Now what do you see?
What are the signals of word stress?
Ah, yes. Well, I had them flying in. Will it fly in?
Yep, it's come in.
Okay, so that's length. Length of that central vowel, the peak vowel. Claudia wants to know what happened to get the process into long-term memory. That's a lot of repetition of a chunk of the language. All right, now I've got it. Oh, that's a help. The second most powerful signal is clarity of that vowel. Contrastive clarity. That's because, like the butterfly, you have to contrast, highlight that vowel and background the other, so it's contrastive. Now, people are going to ask, what about loudness? And that's a very common belief about stress, because, of course, if you make more effort with your lungs, that is a kind of stress, and it's almost universal in the world's languages. But the fact that it isn't necessary to practice that for English is that we can distinguish the vowels by length and clarity, even when we're talking at a low whisper. Now, I hope you can all hear this whisper. How do you spell easy? How do you spell easy? And if not, well, anyway, it's true. And we need to focus. There's another. All right, now this is a very distinguished British linguist who wrote, from the point of view of teaching production of stress, length is the variable that most students find easiest to control and is a reliable marker of stress. Here's an example. Now, I hope you, in fact, brought a rubber band. And it needs to be strong enough so you have to make an effort to pull it. I want you to pull it on the stressed syllable. I'm hoping you're doing this with me, because that's the best way to understand this technique. Banana, banana. Say it with me. Banana. I can't hear you, but I'm hoping you're doing it. Of course, if it was me saying it, I'd say banana, banana. It doesn't matter what the local vowel is. What matters is that the stress vowel is lengthened. The core of English rhythm is irregular syllable length. Now, some of you have asked about syllable timing. I used to teach with a metronome to teach syllable timing, stress timing. But there's been so much research since that time when I started to show that all languages have some irregularity, but English depends on it. And it isn't so much the distance between the stresses, it's that it demonstrates where the peak vowels are. So I'd like you to try this first horizontal line with me, and I hope you're using your rubber bands. Banana, remain, mainly, attractive, principle. There's a whole list there, and this will come up in a few days, I think, in the IATEFL archive. And if not, if you don't get it there, you can ask me for these slides to have some samples to work with. Now, back to these two main types of English. As some of you noticed, of course, laboratory is British, and that means that this is the syllable that matters, and this is the vowel that matters. Whatever, by the way, whatever IPA symbols you're comfortable with, use them, but it's the same thing. It has to be lengthened. And in an American way, laboratory. It doesn't matter really what the vowel is. It matters that it be right for that type of English and that it be lengthened. And here is easy in a more common British notation. There are different forms of IPA in different places because there are different analyses. This colon means longer, which is an important aspect. I use that little superscript because I want to show for this vowel that there is an additional little higher sound. Okay. Now, contrast and clarity. Stressed vowels are long, extra long. Extra long. That's what the rubber band is for. And it is, it takes effort to pull it. And this takes concentrated effort on the learner. And it's the focus of the learner that you want. When they're focused, they learn. When their mind wanders, they don't. So that's why this helps. Okay. Now, non-stressed vowels are often reduced to schwa. I know very well that there are several different sounds that can be reduced instead of schwa. It depends on the regional dialect. It depends on how detailed you want to be. But I think for learners, it's best to just concentrate on schwa. There was an excellent webinar just a few weeks ago with Sinead Lafan, and the title was The Cult of Schwa, and it was all about how to teach, how to use different approaches, different types of activities, different tasks to teach schwa. Now, schwa is the most common sound in spoken English because most other vowels that aren't the stressed one are reduced. They can be reduced so much that a whole syllable is lost. And that is what happens in laboratory and laboratory. And it's very hard for students who have not been taught about schwa to recognize what happened. When they're trying to figure out what happened in that missing syllable or that missing unclear vowel sound, they are thinking about it and the speaker continues talking. So that's when the student loses context. Here's examples of one way you can show it just by drawing a line through the reduced vowel. Here are two reduced vowels. The longer the word, the more likely you have more reduced vowels. And that's why it's so crucial for students to learn about it. Even if they don't use it themselves, they need it for listening comprehension. All right, here's one visual way to show the difference. Stressed vowel is long and clear. It's very easy to hear. In fact, that's the whole purpose of making it long and clear. And by the way, when you make it long, you are relying on the rhythm of English, the system. All right, there are going to be in a long word some unstressed vowels that are short, but they're still clear and they can be heard. But the reduced vowels are deliberately, systematically made very short and unclear, vague. They're very hard to hear. They may not be heard at all if the syllable's reduced. And that makes the listener get confused, and that confusion slows down their listening comprehension. All right. Now, what happens to word stress in a thought group? In my first edition of Clear Speech, I taught word stress a lot, how you should stress a word, every content word, and sometimes even structure words in a sentence. Then when I went to the teaching the thought groups, that is at the sentence level, teacher said to me, "You're confusing my students because they think they should be stressing every content word." So I, once again, learned a lesson by discussing this with my mentor, Dwight Bollinger, who was a very distinguished American linguist. And he said to me, "I never thought you distinguished clearly enough between lexical and utterance level." Well, that was kind of technical terms for me to use for my students. So he reworded it. He said, "Word stress patterns are just a potential. The word stress pattern is only noticed, that is actually realized, when that particular word is the focus of information." The speaker decides what word is important, and everything else has to be backgrounded. I didn't like to use the word potential for my students because I thought it would be discouraging when they're learning word stress. But the fact is, they need to learn the dictionary stress pattern for each word that they're going to use, because then they have it available if it's the one they decide is the focus of information. There are a lot of more technical terms for focus of information, but I think that's the simplest. Here again is the pyramid. The thought group's the foundation. Easy is the focus word. Ease is the stressed syllable. Ease is the peak vowel. This is the peak of information. And I'm using the symbol that I like, but you use any symbol you're comfortable with. Now, how is the focus word emphasis made? Why is it different than a word by itself? Because there's a noticeable change in pitch. Focus rule 1. There's a pitch change on the vowel of the stressed syllable of the focus word. The pitch change can be up or down, but it must be a change. For instance, I could say, how do you spell easy? How do you spell easy? Now, both of those mean the same thing. It's more common to have a rise in pitch, but what is essential is that the pitch change is noticed. Now, this is called a kazoo. It looks like a flute sort of a thing that you blow in, but it doesn't work that way. When you hum into it, it amplifies the sound in your vocal cords. If I blow, nothing happens because the vocal cords aren't part of it. So if you can find one in a toy store or a party goods store, they're very good to pull out of your pocket and remind students about the pitch pattern. Now, what I'd like you to do, by the way, I forgot to say that I think the simplest way to speak about contrastive emphasis of a thought group is new information versus old information. There are a lot more technical ways to describe this contrast, but I think that's the simplest. Now, I want you to say this with me using your rubber band and also raising your hands. This means doing two things at once, using the rubber band and raising it when you get to the opening sentence of this dialogue. Okay? Follow that car. Say it again with me. Follow that car. And now new information. Which car? The yellow one. You should use every kind of kinesthetic aid you can. If they're walking around the room saying these sentences, they should take a longer step for the peak vowel, and they should rise up on their toes. If they're just sitting in their chairs, they should raise their hands or sit up straight, or if they aren't likely to fall over, if they can hang on to the next chair in front of them, have them get up a little bit from the chair. Anything that focuses the mind on that rise and that lengthening. I'm going to go on now. I want you to write in the chat box. You don't have to, but it's going to be simple, and then I can tell who's catching it. Okay. I'm going to say either sentence A or B. The words are the same, but the focus word is different. And I want you to write in the chat box A or B. This shouldn't take long. Okay. I wanted a cup of soup. I wanted a cup of soup. You're doing very well. I'm delighted with that because that shows you're onto this. All right, I'm going to do something different now. I want you to write either not coffee or not a bowl, and I'm going to use a kazoo. That makes it harder. Not A or B, but not a bowl or not coffee. Oh, right. Please write these words, not B or A. Good. Well, Robin helped out there. Not a bowl. Okay. Now you're on to it. It's a much more challenging to hear it with a kazoo. And if you can't find a kazoo, you might find something else, or wave your hand when you're speaking. But what they need to answer, the student B is the listener. Student B needs to answer the correct way. If the wrong answer is given, for instance, if the listener says not coffee, then you have immediate feedback that there was a breakdown in communication to this sentence. So either the listener just didn't catch the cue, and of course I made it harder for you by using the kazoo, or the speaker didn't make it clear, or the listener didn't catch the stress, the emphasis on that word. Okay, let's try one more thing here. I want you to answer in the chat box. either this or this. Give me the word answer, not B. Either not apples or not 6. I'll say it again. We asked for 5 oranges. Now, some of you recognized not 6. In fact, you all are now. That's great. Okay, let me do a summary here of what I think has to be learned first. And this is not a simple project. So it takes a lot of work focusing on the different parts of the pyramid so they all come together. Prosody is the framework of the whole system. Thought group is the foundation unit, and that has to do with punctuation, by the way. And when you're teaching punctuation, it's a good idea to work on this. Where does the pitch drop at the end of the unit, the thought group? Each thought group has one focus word. They have to hear that change in pitch. They have to notice the lengthening and extra clear vowel, because that's the most important word in the sentence. Each focus word has one primary stress. There may be other stresses, but that's the one that counts. And by the way, these are where you focus on the clarity of the vowel. The rest of the vowels don't have to be clear. In fact, they're usually reduced, most of them, so they don't have to be so clear. But this is where the student has to focus on getting the vowel right. Peak vowels are the peak of information. Okay, I'm going to start answering questions now. And use this email address if you want to email me for this booklet. It includes rules for peak vowels, and you may wonder how the rules can work for the different forms of English, because you have different vowels than I do, most of you. And it works because, for British English and American anyway, it works because it's based on statistics from a huge corpus study of British and American dictionaries. And so the probability is presented for how these rules work. And that's to help students believe it's worthwhile learning them. I have listed my most recent books because they're the only ones that use the prosody pyramid. And throughout, I was given color. So throughout, they're color-coded so that when you're practicing focus or you're practicing vowels, you have the color code of the rules given. Okay, now I want to look at some. I see some question already. Jane wants to know about evidence for stress and syllable-timed language. Well, Dower, Rebecca Dower, trouble is I have trouble remembering names, even in ordinary life. And I can give that to you if you write to me and I can look them up. But there's quite a bit of evidence against the distinction between stress time and syllable time languages. That's called isochrony, meaning there's the same time between each major stress in the sentence. I used to teach that with a metronome, and I thought I was very clever. Half of the class would say the short version, half of the class would say the longer version with a few little bitty words in there, and it turned out to be the same time. Well, I got convinced by Bollinger and Dower and a number of other researchers that it just doesn't work that way. It sort of works that way. But I think that's a mechanical way to teach prosody. I think the most important part of English prosody is for students to know how to choose the most important word to them that they want the listener to listen to notice, and then give that extra length. There are other reasons for lengthening vowels, but they are less important, I think. And that's why I just start with this one, that peak vowel in the most important place in the focus word. Now, Dower. Rebecca Dower. So please just write to me if you want some more sites, because I can give lots of sites for things, but I didn't include them in this because it's too complicated and I wanted to simplify. Good for Madalena. She gave the answer, the right. And there's a Swedish writer, and I cannot think of her name, Ilse Lehisti. I can't give you the site now, but I can look it up. She's a very distinguished linguist, Ilse Lehisti. I wrote to her, and she convinced me that isochrony was not a good basis. But I think of it mostly as a mechanical rule, and I don't like mechanical rules. I like rules that are based on what the speaker wants to express. And of course, Dwight Bollinger and I can give you the exact site if you write to me. He wrote accent is, he meant the main stress, the focus in the sentence. He said it's predictable if you're a mind reader. It has to do with what the speaker has in mind. And again, I can give you that reference if you write to me. Have I missed a question? Wayne asks, how long would it take to teach this framework to a class from scratch? Well, you never start from scratch. Well, at least I never have. There are always people in the class who've learned rules of one kind or another, or who've gotten notions of one kind or another. And I don't know how long it would take. It depends how alert the class is and how much they can focus on what they're doing. That's why I use a kazoo and a rubber band, and that's why I wave my hands and do whatever, and have people walking around the room. Do whatever I can to focus their minds. I don't know how long it takes. And furthermore, they may not show what they've absorbed for 6 months or a year later. That's why the teacher has to get good feedback from the start with the pair practice, where the pairs are challenging each other and getting immediate feedback. You don't really know what's been placed in long-term memory until you talk to the student later. maybe a year later. So I can't answer that question. And what is a thought group exactly? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Claudia. A thought group is a short sentence or a clause, if it's a compound sentence, or if it's a long sentence, it might even be a phrase. And I meant to say that, so thank you, Claudia. Yes, and Brenda has some good ideas using other terms. Use what other terms for a template sentence. It's a chunk, which is a kind of a chunky, clumsy word, but it means part of the language that can be placed in such long-term memory that can be used as a model later by the student when the student's alone. Thank you, Wayne, for suggesting Richard Caldwell. Yes, indeed. He is another one of these anti-isochronicity people, and we've talked about it a lot. His whole work is with the way prosody squashes language and makes it into kind of a jungle, the spoken language. And his work is, Richard Caldwell's work is training people for listening to these sounds and words and everything that's affected by the prosody push to make a contrast between the focus and everything else. Oh, thank you, Madalena, for giving the Bollinger reference. Accent is predictable if you're a mind reader. He was a wonderful writer, and he had a way with words. Yes. Volha says, is thought group the same as an utterance? Well, if it's a short sentence or a clause yeah, it depends. Short sentence, yes, it's a sentence. By the way, when I first was, I've had 4 editions, so each time I try to get better because teachers come back to me. And when I changed in my 2nd edition to separating the thought group, that is the utterance, from the word, teacher said to me, but I can hear the pitch change in a word. If I say the word banana, well, they'd be saying banana. I can hear the pitch. So I asked Bollinger, what about that? He said, if you say a word alone, it's a complete utterance. And of course, it has all the elements, the prosodic elements of a longer group of words. So that was the answer to that. It's very good to have linguists you can ask questions of. Rizwana wants to know, how effective will it be to use prosody pyramid with adult learners? That's what I use it with. I've always been a teacher of adult learners until I went into teacher training, and they're all adults. But I think you could use this with younger children. As I mentioned, in junior high school, you probably don't want to use a rubber band. If you can get hold of a lot of kazoos, by the way, and rubber bands, it's a very good way for them to physically practice. The slide link, well, I don't know. IATEFL will put the slides on for IATEFL members. If you need it now, write to me. This is my link, and I'll send it to you. Just ask for the PowerPoint slides, or I'll also, if you want, send you the booklet, Teaching Pronunciation Using the Prosody Pyramid. This gives a lot more background, theoretical background, that there's not room for in the teacher's manuals. That's why I wrote it. Why are international course books not taking Prosody pyramid on board. My goodness, international course books are hardly taking pronunciation on board. That's very old-fashioned, and I've tried to work with both American and British coursebook people to say this is crucial to learn from the beginning. But there's a long history, more than 50 years history of not thinking pronunciation was important. That's for historical reasons, and it's been a disaster. Robin Walker says Jonathan Marks suggested that stress timing was possibly a useful teaching technique, but not reality. I agreed. I started out with thinking it was a really lot of fun to teach as a teaching technique, but I think it's more crucial for them to understand the whole idea of focusing on the most important word. That's a crucial thing to learn. Yes, Marisol says it's what Wells calls an IP, a intonation phrase. Yes, there's lots of abstract terms. That's why I stick with a really simple one. And Peter Maurizio is talking about Peter Roach's definition. Yes, utterance, but an utterance could be very long, and that's why I use thought group. Is there another question? We're about ready to finish. Maybe one more question. Well, if not, please do write to me because I like to talk with teachers, and I can send you the booklet or the slides if you want them. Okay, there's Robin.
So, hi Judy, that's really been wonderful. I knew it was going to be, and my only fear was this business of technology, but you've put in so much time. You spent so many hours with Alex, I know, myself and Louise Guyette, who's there in Dublin. We're really grateful for all of that time and all of that effort. We hope it hasn't been too stressful for you. We've certainly really enjoyed listening to you today and benefited from that. I'm sitting here clutching, I don't know if my camera will pick it up, your booklet on teaching pronunciation using the Prosody pyramid, which CUP published for Judy in 2008, but it's just absolute gold dust. And if I put the details up a couple of times in the chat box, and if people can get their hands on this, then you really have today's webinar in book form.
Well, but let me say something
Yep.
now. The Cambridge has completely updated their catalog, and it's very hard to find that. So if you write to me, I'll send you the file. That's one of the sad things as publishing moves along, things change. I had to say that.
I think that's fairly said. And that's also a really generous offer to people that Judy's going to send you the file, which means you don't have to go hunting around on the internet and so on. Anything else you'd like to say, Judy, or shall we?
No, I'm delighted you all came, and I wish you well, and I hope to hear from some of you. Bye.
I think you certainly will, Judy. Thanks very much. And thank you to all of you for being here. I'm afraid in the recording process, I missed the first 5 minutes, so it will be available as a webinar, but I'm the guilty party for the fact that you're not going to get those first 5 minutes, but of course it was only me speaking about Judy anyway, so you're not really missing anything. The main thing is there, which is Judy helping us to see the simplicity that we need to allow to guide us in our work in the classroom with students struggling to understand and to acquire clear and intelligible pronunciation of English. So,
thank you, Robin, for your help.
no, it was a pleasure, Judy, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again in Birmingham at IATEFL.
Yes.
We're going to be very lucky to see you there and to have you amongst us. It's always fabulous.
And I'm going to give out kazoos and rubber
Okay.
bands. If any of you are going to IATEFL.
Okay, make sure you know how to get through Heathrow and customs. They might ask you what they're for.
Yes, I had that problem once in Vancouver, and I had some explaining to do.
Oh, wow.
That I wasn't selling them.
Oh, God, my God. Goodness gracious. No, I don't think you'll get that from Heathrow Customs. Okay then, everybody. Thanks very much. I'm going to stop the recording and slowly shut down the
Okay.
Connect.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye, Judy. Goodbye, everyone.